Again, a very good morning to you all. So, have you done the calculation parts that was we have to do? I think for the standard deviation and calculate the probability of the project and probability of 99%. What is the schedule time? So, have you all taken the answers? So what is the standard deviation of the project? The questions that I have discussed on Wednesday, and there are only three calculations that I couldn't do due to the time constraint. So did you all do that? Did you all attempt to do this question? What is the standard deviation of the project? Two 2.284. Right. So in this question, do you have any question? So there are three students respond for my question. So according to this question, you have to do several things. Actually, you have to draw your project network. Then after, you have to identify the critical path. Right, 2.28. So then after, you have to identify your critical path. After identifying critical path, I have highlighted those critical path, right? So I have completed up to this point, and all the calculations in the table I have done, right? So I have to do the standard deviation of the project, right? So when you are going to calculate the standard deviation of the project, first you have to identify what are the critical activities, right? So I have identified the critical activities as C, F, H and I, and K and L, right? So after identifying those critical activity, you can calculate the standard deviation of the project. So calculating standard deviation of the project, you can use this equation. So you have to take the square root after getting the summation of all the variances of critical path activity, right? So in here, I have calculated those things. So I have taken the square root, and I have taken the variances of the critical path activity. So I think you can see I have only taken the critical path activities variances, right? So after solving this, I get 2.285 answer, right? So those who have responded are right. So thank you very much for responding. And the fourth question I asked from you is, if the project is expecting, or the scheduling time to complete the project is 50. If that's so, what is the probability of completing that project? Right? So if you are getting like this question, first you have to identify the Z value, right? So in identifying Z value, you have to take the time schedule. From that, you have to deduct the time expected, and the whole thing you have to divide it by the standard deviation of the project. So we have now calculate the standard deviation of the project as 2.285, and they are given the scheduled time as 50 days. So under 50 days, we are now what is the expected time to complete this project. So after drawing this project network, you can identify the expected time to be complete this project. So what is the expected time to complete this project according to this example? Sandhuni has responded as 53 days. Very good, Udara. Right. So according to this example, the sorry, expected time to complete this project is 53 days. Therefore, you have to take the total schedule as 50 days. From that 50 days, you have to deduct the expected time to be completed 53 days, and the whole thing you have to divide by the standard deviation of the project. So that is 2.285. So after getting that value, after solving that equation, you are getting the z value. The z value is minus 1.31. So after getting that z value, you have to see that z value from what? From z value table. You have to see that from the z value table. Let me share the screen itself so it would be easier. Right, so the z value we have taken is minus 1.3, right? So we have to go for the negative z value. So in negative z value, you can see 1.3. What is the value? 1.3. 1.3. 1.31 minus 1.31 means this is the value 0.0951. 0.0951. It should be 0.0951, right? So 0.0951 is the value. So I have taken this here, and it is better to put it as a percentage value. Therefore, I have put it as 9.51%. So what is the meaning of this 9.51? So at the exam, I can ask you to explain this 9.51. After getting this probability, you have to explain that. So the explanation for this is there is a 9.51 percentage. The probability is 9.51 to complete the project within 50 days. Right. So likewise, you can calculate the z value for the 56th day as well. So instead of getting 50, you have to put the 56 minus 53 and divide the whole thing by standard deviation. So the value you are getting is 1.31, and again you have to see it from the z value table. So z value table you have to see from the positive value, positive value 1.31, that is 0.9049. 0.9049, right? So after getting that value, better to convert it into a percentage, right? So that's all for the fourth question. And the fifth one is, if the probability is 99%, calculate the schedule time. So in this scenario, they are given us the probability and asking us the schedule time. So in that case, you have to see that what? You have to see where is the place there, where is the place the 99% is there in the z value table. That is the first step that you have to take when you get the probability percentage. So 99% probability percentage, where is the place? So can anyone tell me? So you can see there is no any exact place for the 99%. Therefore, you have to take 2 points and take the average, right? So you can see between 2.32 and 2.33, the 99% should be there. Therefore, you have to take 2.32 plus 2.33 and divide that by 2 to get the average. So 2.32 plus 2.33, divide that by 2 to get an average. Therefore, the Z value is 2.325, right? So according to this equation, you now know what is the Z value. Z value is 2.325. And you did not know the total schedule time, but you know the total expected time to complete this project, that is 53, as well as you know the Z value, it is 2.285, right? So the unknown value is total schedule time. Therefore, you can substitute all this value for this equation and you can solve that for the total schedule time. So Z value we know, it is 2.325. From that value, you have to multiply it by the standard deviation of the project. It is 2.285. Then after you have to add this total expected time of 53. So after adding that value, you are getting the total scheduled time is 58.31. So we know as these are days, 58.31 cannot be taken. Therefore, you have to write the answer with the approximate figure. So the approximate figure for the 58.31 is 59 days, right? So this is the calculation that you have to do for the last question of program evaluation and review technique. So if you have any question regarding program evaluation and review technique, you can ask now before I move into the next lesson. Don't you have any questions regarding this program evaluation and review technique? If so, please indicate that as well. Hello, I am asking a question from you. Still you are sleeping? Right, only 2 students responded. I don't know what about others. So let's start the next lesson for today. So can you all see my slides? Can you all hear me properly? Because for my area there is a rain. So if my line is breaking or if you could not listen properly, please indicate that as well, right? Can you hear me properly? for that you are responding. I mean, don't you have get all the things that I have discussed for the previous lesson? Huh? If you have any doubts regarding that lesson I have discussed, please feel free to ask any question, right? Right. Okay. So the next lesson is actually based on the resource scheduling. So we know how to draw the project network, and after drawing the project network, how to identify the critical path, how to calculate the early start, late finish, early finish, and how to calculate slack. After calculating all these things, how to identify the critical path, and in the last lesson we have discussed there can be there can be actually they can give some time values time regarding pessimistic, optimistic, as well as the uh, medium. So A, M, B can be given. They will be given 3 time slots, right? Most pessimistic, optimistic, and most likely time. So if you take and like this question, you cannot take all these 3 time period to draw the project network, and then after identifying critical part, those cannot be done if you are taking what if you are taking 3 times, right? Therefore, in that case, you have to calculate the expected time. For each of these activity, you have to calculate the expected time, and after calculating expected time, you are getting one duration for each of these activity. Then after, you can continue the calculations same as the things that we have done for the project network, right? So those are the things that we have discussed so far. So the next topic is resource scheduling, right? In the resource scheduling means we know when we are beginning to do a project, we do not have enough resources, right? That can be resource constraint or time constraint, right? There can be project where we cannot get more resources with the resources we are having for today has to be utilized, and has to be utilized in efficient and effective manner and complete the project, right? At the same time, you may have a constraint with time, right? Within that time frame, you have to complete your project, right? There can be some constraint. Therefore, we have to schedule our resources depending on the constraint that we are getting for one particular project, right? So that is the thing we are discussing here today, right? So the resource problem. So there can be some resource problems or resource issues are there in a project, right? Resources and priorities. Project network times are not a schedule until resources have been assigned. So after assigning the resources, we can finalize the project network, right? So in drawing the project network, actually for this moment, so after in the last lesson itself, you have now know how to allocate time, right? We get only the time frame, we get only the duration for each of these activities, right? After getting each of these duration, and after identifying what are the preceding activities for each of these activities, we can draw the project network, right? So I think we all know, no, to do a project we need time as well as the resources. There can be people, we want people, material, equipment, as well as working capital to do our project, right? As well as the time is also required. So project network times are not a schedule until resources have been assigned. Until we are assigning resources, we cannot finalize our project network, right? The implicit assumption is that resources will be available in the required amounts when needed. So we are assuming that. So in the previous lesson that we are drawing the project network, in that case, we are assuming that we are having all the resources that we are requiring to finish the project, right? But if we take the real scenario, there can be, actually there are resource constraints, right? If we take the in economic perspective also, we are learning that resources are scarce, right? There is a scarcity of resources. That means the resources cannot are not available at the required amount. There is a scarcity for the resources, right? So adding new projects requires making realistic judgment of resource availability and project duration. So when we are going to add when we are going to add some projects, there can be constraint for the resource availability, right? So one particular company is going to be undertaken one project at one particular time, right? In that case, there can be more than enough resources and more than enough time available for that company. But when that company is going to be added uh, 2 and 3 projects to their company, there can be resource availability constraint as well as the time availability constraint, right? Uh, so the resource problem continues. Therefore, we are now know after adding it one by one project, there can be problems regarding the resource that can be regarding the time as well as the resources, right? Therefore, we have to do the resource leveling or smoothing, right? So that means involves attempting to even out varying demands on resources by using slack, delaying non-critical activities to manage resource utilization when resources are adequate over the life of the project. So when we are having a problems regarding the resource, we can actually level the resources, resource leveling, or we can call it as resource smoothing, right? So in that case, in that resource leveling or smoothing, it is involving the even out. Even out means evenly distributed. That means සමානව අපි බෙදා හරිනවා. හරිද? Involves attempting to even out varying demands on resources by using slack. By using slack means if there are slack time available means we can delay the non-critical activity. If there are some slacks available means that activity that activity is actually a non-critical activity. So that non-critical activity we can delay, right? To manage resource utilization when resources are adequate over the life of the project, right? So uh, actually when you are coming here for the lesson, you should have to have a very good understanding about what is the meaning of slack and what is the meaning of non-critical activities, right? So that's why I'm asking you, do you have any questions? So if you are having any question and if you are going through the lesson by lesson, actually you could not understand the meaning of those words, right? So what is the meaning of slack? What is the meaning of slack? So slack means we can delay our activity. So if we take activity A, there is a slack time of 2 days, right? That means we can delay that activity A by 2 days, right? So if we are having a slack time, that means that is not the that is not a critical activity. If you are you have to assume that activity A has a slack time of 2 days, right? And that activity A is now, as it is having a slack time, means it is not a critical activity, that become a non-critical activity. So that non-critical activity or of activity A can be delayed for 2 days, right? So in resource leveling or smoothing part, we are actually smoothing out. We are actually evening out the varying demand for resources by using slack. We are utilizing the slacks, right? By utilizing the slack, we are delaying the non-critical activity, and we want to manage the resources over the life of the project, right? So the next one is resource constraint scheduling. The duration of the project may be increased by delaying the late start of some of its activity if resources are not adequate to meet peak demand. So if the resources are constrained, so we know there are some peak demand time, right? So if I take an example, New Year is a peak time and the Christmas season is also a peak time, right? So in that peak time, we could not sometimes meet the resource requirement, right? We do not have enough resources to meet that peak demands, right? The duration of the project may be increased by delaying the late start of some of its activity if resources are not adequate to meet peak demand. So if the resources are not adequate to meet our peak demand, we can delay, or we can delay actually the late start of some of these activities if we are having a resource constraint. Resource leveling එක සිංහලෙන් කියන්නට. දැන් මේ resource leveling එකේදී ඇත්තටම වෙන්නේ අපි බලනවා අපේ non critical activities කියන්නේ මොනවද කියලා. හරිද? අපිට identify කරගන්න පුළුවන් non critical activities තමයි මේ එක student කෙනෙක් resource leveling එක explain කරන්න කියලා සිංහලෙන් කියපු හින්දා මම මේ කියන්නේ ආයේ හොඳයි. දැන් අපි මුලින්ම project network එක ඇඳලා අපි identify කරගත්ත early start, late start, early finish, late finish, slack time අපි identify කරගත්තා. හරිද? slack time එක අපි ගත්තේ මොකද්ද? difference between late start and early start, right? The difference between late start and early start we are taking අපි ඒක ගත්ත slack එක විදියට. හරිද? slack එක කියන්නේ slack time එකක් තියෙනවා කියන්නේ ඒක non-critical activity එකක් බවට පත් වෙනවා. ඒ කියන්නේ අපිට ඒ activity එක delay කරන්න පුළුවන් ඒ තියෙන days ගානේ. දැන් අපි example එකක් ගත්තොත් අපේ activity A එකට slack time එකක් තියෙනවා 2 days. හරිද? ඒ කියන්නේ අපිට ඒ activity A එක delay කරන්න පුළුවන් 2 days වලින්. හරිද? ඒ කියන්නේ අපි අපේ තියෙන resources level කරනවා අර slacks time උත් utilize කරගෙන අපේ resources හරි විදිහට යොදා ගන්න පුළුවන් වෙන විදිහට අර adequate life of the project එකේදී අපි ඒ project time period එකේදී ඒවා ඉවර කරගන්න පුළුවන් වෙන විදිහට අපේ තියෙන resources කියන්නේ හරි විදිහට utilize කරලා අර slack time තියෙනවා නම් ඒවත් අපි යොදා ගන්න එක තමයි resource leveling වලදී කරන්නේ. slack time එකක් තියෙනවා කියන්නේ අපිට ඒ activity එක delay කරන්න පුළුවන් තව days ගාණක් තියෙනවා. ඒ තව තියෙන days ගාණත් අපි utilize කරනවා මේ resource leveling වලදී. So did I answer my ඔයාලට දැන් තේරුණාද? MF එක විතරයි තියෙන්නේ නම නැහැ. 5549. Right. So resource leveling can also be done as well as the resource constraint schedule. So in a resource constraint schedule means we are having some peak demand time. So in that peak demand times we are not having enough resources to meet that peak demand. In that case, we can delay our late start time of some of our activities, right? So likewise, like the student that asked the question about it, please explain that again. So likewise, if you are not clear about what I am telling for what I am explaining for you, please feel free to ask, right? the next slide it explaining its types of project constraint. There are some constraint that the project can have, right? So actually there are three constraints that we can basically identify under the types of project constraint, right? Technical or logical constraint. Technical or logical constraint and physical constraint, resource constraint. Those are the three major project constraint that we can identify, right? So under technical or logic constraint, constraints related to the network sequence in which project activities must occur. So we know in a project network, we have to follow a sequence, right? So if we are having some preceding activities that means we have to complete that preceding activity before starting other activity, right? So there is a sequence that we have to follow, right? So that sequence need to be followed, and that can be called it as technical or logical constraint. So if we are not completing some of the preceding activity, we cannot actually go forward with our project network, right? So the next one is physical constraint. Activities that cannot occur in parallel or are affected by contractual or environmental condition. So there can be actually project constraint for the physical constraint. So there are some activities that cannot be done in parallel. Parallel means all of these activity can be done at the same time. Parallel mean that. So there can be incidents where we cannot do some of the activities parallelly or are affected by contractual or environmental condition. So the next one is resource constraint. The absence, shortage, or unique interrelationship or interaction characteristic of resources that require a particular sequencing of project activities. So there can be absence of resources, shortage of resources due to the unique condition that the resource is having. We have to buy that resources, right? So like those constraints can be occur regarding the resource constraint. So basically, there are the three project constraints that we can identify, right? So the technical constraint and the resource constraints are explained in here. So in the technical constraint, I have explained if we are having a consequence to be followed, we have to go in that consequence. So if I take the design activity, before starting the design activity, we have to start the project, right? So before doing the coding, we have to finish it off our design activity, right? Likewise, there are some preceding activity, and there is a sequence to be followed when we are doing this, when we are actually engaging in a project network. So that is the technical constraint. So it is a graphical representation for the technical constraint, right? The next one is resource constraint. Resource constraints. So for that resource constraint, what are the things we told? There can be physical absence, shortage, and unique things, right? So resource can be physically constrained as well, right? So uh, uh, so if I take we are going to get a wedding. We are planning to have a wedding, right? So in 1 year period, we are planning to have our wedding. So assume that the one person is uh, planning to have their wedding on next year, right? So when they are planning to have their wedding in next year, they have to purchase some refreshment, decorate the hall and hire a band. So those are basically some of the activities that they have to do when they are planning their wedding for the next year, right? So those three activities actually can be done in a parallel manner. We can purchase the refreshment, decorate the hall, and hire the band after identify. So we are there is a couple, and that couple is going to get their wedding in the next year, and they have selected a hotel for that, and that hotel has to done all these activities in a parallel manner. They have to purchase the refreshment, decorate the hall, and hire the band. So hiring the band is also given for the hotel, right? But you have to assume that that hotel is not having enough resources to done all these three activities in parallel manner. Therefore, there is only a one manager to do all this activity. Therefore, the one manager cannot be done all these activities in parallel. Therefore, after planning their wedding, after giving all these responsibilities to the hotel management will first see what is the band we are going to hire for this wedding, right? So after sorting out the band that they are going to get for the wedding, they will go for decorating the hall. After decorating the hall, they will go and buy the purchase refreshment, right? So if they do not have any resource constraint, they can do these three activities parallelly. But if according to that example, that hotel is having only one manager to do all these three tasks, right? Therefore, these three tasks cannot be occurred in a parallel manner. Therefore, we have to do first thing. We have to take one activity first, and we have to finish it up that activity and go for the next activity, right? So activities that cannot occur in parallel or are affected by contractual or environmental condition. So there are some activities that can be happen in a parallel manner, but due to the resource and the physical constraint that they are having, uh, they cannot do those activities in parallel, right? So this is an example for the resource constraint. So do you have any questions regarding these examples? Right. So the next one is kinds of resource constraint. There can be a resource constraint. So I have told you there are resource constraint as well. So there can be absence, there can be shortage, and due to the unique characteristic that the resources are having, there can be resource constraint. So this resource constraint, again, we can divide it into kinds of resource constraint. There can be people resource constraint, material constraint, equipment constraint, and working capital constraint. So we know there can be some incidents where we need some skilled people. We need some unique skilled people to do some of the activity, right? If we are not having the skilled people to do all these tasks, there is a resource constraint. So the example that I have taken for planning for the wedding and organizing the wedding hall, that hotel is only having one manager to do all these tasks. Only one skillful manager is having. That means for that hotel there is a resource or the people constraint is there. And sometimes there can be material constraint as well, right? There is no any enough resources to complete the project. There are some constraint regarding the material. As well, there can be equipment constraint as well. We need actually three equipment to produce some of the production, but actually that company is having two equipment, right? That means there is a constraint of one equipment. And there can be working capital constraint as well. Working capital means the money that we are needing to do the day-to-day activities, right? We have to buy, we have to purchase goods, and we have to purchase what? Resources to produce our production. So likewise, we have to pay debts for, we have to pay loans, we have to pay interest, short term. So likewise, we are needing some working capital for our company. And for some of the companies, there can be a constraint regarding the working capital as well. So classification of a scheduling program. There can be project where the time constraint is there, right? So if we actually we can classify the project based on the constraint. Basically, we are going to identify time constraint project and the resource constraint project, right? So if I take the time constraint project means, so in time constraint project, you can see time is going to be constrained, right? Time is going to be constrained means time is fixed, and the resources are flexible. So in this scenario, time is fixed and resources are flexible. And the other scenario is resource constraint project. In the resource constraint project, the resources are going to be constrained, but the time is flexible. So those are not in your handout. Actually, I did not upload this handout to the LMS. So please make some note on this as well. So actually, I want to add more slides to this handout. That's why I did not upload this to the LMS. So please make some note. If the project is time constrained means the time is fixed and resources are flexible. And if the project is resource constrained means the resources are fixed, resources cannot be changed. Those are having at a fixed level, and time are flexible, right? Is that okay? So if I take the time constraint project, so we are going to see what is the meaning of time constraint project in detail, right? A project that must be completed by an imposed date. We have to complete that project, must be completed. That project must be completed by an imposed date, right? In time constraint project, the time is fixed. We have to complete that project with the imposed date. Require the use of leveling technique that focus on balancing or smoothing resource demand by using positive slack, delaying non-critical activity to manage resource utilization over the duration of the project. So actually, if we are having non-critical activity means those non-critical activities will definitely have positive slack. So that positive slack can be used by using the time constraint project as well. Require the use of leveling technique. We are going to level our resources that focus on balancing or smoothing resource demand. We are going to balance or smoothing our resources by using positive slack. We can use the positive slack. If we are having the positive slack means that activities are become non-critical activity. So that non-critical activities we can actually delay to manage resource utilization over the duration of the project. Over the duration of the project, we are going to use our positive slack and delay the non-critical activities. So in a time constraint project, time is fixed. Time is going to be fixed, but resources are flexible. Additional resources are required to ensure project meets schedule. So in a time constraint project, we have to meet the imposed date, right? We have to meet the imposed date means there is no any extension given for the time period, right? So in that scenario, we have to use some additional resources to meet our schedule, right? So in a time constraint project, time is fixed and resources are flexible. As the resources are flexible, we can buy or we can purchase additional resources that is required to meet our schedule, right? So that is for the time constraint project. So the next one is resource constraint project. So basically there are two constraint project, time constraint and the resource constraint project. So now I'm explaining the second resource constraint project, second one. A project in which the level of resources available cannot be exceed. The level of the resource cannot be exceed now. Under resource constraint, we cannot exceed the level of resources available cannot be exceed. Projects that involve resources that are limited in quantity or by their availability. So there can be a situation where the resources are limited. Resources are limited that can be occur in a quantity or by the availability. The resources are limited that can be occurred in the quantity or by the availability. That means the resources are fixed, but the time is going to be flexible. Inadequate resources will delay the project, right? So when now we are when we do not have adequate resources to do our project, means resources are fixed and our time is now going to be flexible. So as we do not have any adequate resources to do our project, we have to delay our project, right? Due to the time is flexibility of time, the delay in the project is not a big matter, right? So those are the two constraint projects that we are having. Right. So the next one is resource allocation method. Now we know there are some limitation for the resources or constraint for the resources. So therefore we have to allocate our resources. So there is a method that when we are going to allocate the resources, there is a method. And in that method, we have to assume limiting assumption. There are some assumption that we have to have. Splitting activities is not allowed. Once an activity is start, it is carried out to completion. So in a resource allocation method, we have to these are the assumption that we are limiting, right? So there are some activities sorry, there are some activities and those activities cannot be splitting. Splitting means we cannot divide the activity. So if we have started one of these activity, means we have to complete that activity. We have to carry it up to the completion. We cannot split that activity. We cannot partially complete that activity and stop that activity and go for another activity. Cannot be done. Splitting activities is not allowed. Once an activity is start, it is carried out to completion. That is one of the assumptions that we have to do when we are allocating resources. Level of resource used for an activity cannot be changed. And we know you can see that in the upcoming example you will take the level of resources needed, right? So the level of resources needed cannot be changed when we are going to allocate in resources. The level of resources needed is same, right? Activity, the third assumption is activities with the most slack pose the least risk. So if we are having more slack, means it is having a least risk, right? That means we can delay the activity. If our slacks are high, the risk is low. When we are having more slack, the risk is low because we can delay the activities as much as possible. For an example, the same example I take, for activity A, there is a slack of 2. That means the activity A can be delayed for 2 days, right? So if we are having more slack, if we, for example, if I take the C activity, that C activity is having 10 slacks. That means it is having 10 more days to be delayed. So when we can delay that activity C by 10 days means there is a lesser risk compared to the A. A activity is only having 2 slack. But if we take the C activity, it is having 10 slack. That means we can delay the C activity by 10 days. That means the activity C is having a least risk with compared to the activity A. The next assumption is reduction of flexibility does not increase risk. So if we are reducing the flexibility means, if we are reducing the flexibility means that is not the indication of increase of risk. දැන් අම්මශීලී බව අඩු වුණා කියලා risk එකේ වෙනසක් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. Right? So the last assumption is the nature of an activity easy complex does not increase risk. So based on the activity nature, that means there can be activity which can be done easily or a complex activity. Based on those activity easy or complexity, that is not going to increase the risk. Right? So those are the limiting assumptions that you have to remember when we are allocating the resources. So do you have any question up to this point? So when I am asking a question, please respond. So basically this topic is having a theoretical part to be discussed in the firstly, then after you can you are actually having some calculation to be done, but without knowing this theoretical part you cannot go ahead with that calculation. That's why I'm explaining those theoretical parts, and please remember that at your exam also I will ask those theoretical part as well. So if I'm giving you some calculation, before giving that calculation, the first 1 and 2 question can be asked by getting this theoretical concept, right? I can ask, write down the limiting assumption when you are going to allocate the resource allocation method. What are the limiting assumption? And these are the 4 limiting assumptions that I have discussed, and you have to write down those limiting assumption as well as you have to explain that thing, right? If I ask the question as write down the limiting assumption of resource allocation method and explain that, right? So when I'm telling that explain, that means you did not you are not adequate to write down these 2 sentence, right? After writing down these 2 sentence, you have to make some explanation for that as well. So splitting an activity means this, and when there are more slack means there can be delayed in there can be reduction of risk. So likewise I take an example and explain for you now by getting activity A and activity C. So likewise in the examination also I am expecting you to write down those example as well. You can take your own example and write down. So activities with more slack pose the least risk. So what is the explanation that you are going to give by using an example, right? So if you are writing down with an example means you can take the whole mark, or the allocated, all the allocated marks can be taken. If not, if you are writing only this point means you will take half of the mark, right? So are you all clear about that? Right. So the next one is resource loading. As we are having the constraint of resources, we have to load our resources, right? The amount of individual resources that a schedule requires during specific time period. During a specific time period, we have to use the individual resources, right? Gives an understanding of the demands a project will make a firm's resources. So resource loading, though all these things I will discuss when I'm doing the calculation, right? So this is an example for the resource loading. If I take the resource A, this much of days and this much of resources are required to complete, right? So resource leveling means we have to use our slack time, right? So can you remember the resource leveling? Resource leveling means involves attempting to even out varying demand on resources by using slack, delay non-critical activity to manage resource utilization when resources are adequate over the life of the project. When the resources are adequate over the life of the project, you have to use the slack time, right? That is the resource leveling. So resource leveling or smoothing objectives are to determine the resource requirements so that they will be available at the right time. So actually resource leveling objectives means we want to determine what are the resource requirement, and that resource requirement resources are available at the right time, to allow each activity to be scheduled with the smoothest possible transition across resource usage level. So across resource usage level, we want to schedule our resources as well. So when we are doing the resource leveling, there is a procedure. There are some steps to be followed, right? So these are the 5 steps you have to follow in resource leveling. So if I take the first one, create a project activity network diagram. So if you are not familiar with how to draw the network diagram, you cannot proceed in this lecture, right? That's why I am asking you whether you are having some questions regarding the previous lesson, right? So when you are going to level in the resources, first you have to draw actually the network diagram, right? And as the second step, you have to develop resource loading table. Then after you have to develop the resource loading table, right? And determine activity late finish date. After having the resource loading table, you can identify what are the late finish date and identify resource over allocation. Then after you can identify what are the over-allocated resources. And the fifth one is level the resource loading table. Then after you have to level the resource loading table. So those are the things that you have to do when you are doing the resource leveling, right? So when we are going to create a resource loading chart, First, you have to start with the network diagram. So I will go for my Excel sheet. Right. This is the Excel sheet, right? So in this Excel sheet, can you see my Excel sheet? Right. So in this Excel sheet, they are given us the what ID of the activity as well as the time, right? So after giving the time and ID, they are indicating what? They are indicating the resources as well. The resource requirement for for their for their activity, right? And you can see I have drawn the project network for you, right? So in the examination I can ask, I can give you the activities, proceeding activity, and I can ask you to draw the project network as well, right? So in here in this example I have drawn you the project network, but I did not fill the early start, early finish, late finish, and slack. So, can we do? uh, So, can you take a piece of paper and draw this project network? So, please draw this project network first, and let me know when you are finished. So then after we can calculate the early start, late finish, early finish. So please indicate that when you are draw this after you have finished this drawing this project network, right? So why the students are getting reduced? Please indicate that when you are finished of drawing this project network, this part only, right? I am asking you to draw this part only, right? This part only. So the rest of the part we have to do by step. So after finishing of drawing this project network, please indicate. I hope the time is enough for you. So after drawing this project network, we have to uh, fill the uh, fill the early start, late start, like those things, right? For if I take the activity A, early start is 0. For that, you have to add the duration of time of 4 for that. After adding 4, you can take the late start. How much? 4. Late start of activity A is 4. That 4 is going for the activity B as well and activity C as well, right? So, can you all do the calculation early start, early finish, and late finish, right? So I am filling those boxes. So if I make some mistake, please let me know, right? So the B activity, we are having early start time of 4. For that, you have to add one duration and you are getting the late start time of 5. For the C activity, the early start time is 4. For that, you have to add 3. That means late start is 7. And after completing B activity, we can start the D activity. For the D activity, early start is 5. For 5, you have to add 4. It means 9. And that 9 is going for here as well. So early start time of E activity is 9. For that, you have to add 2. That means 11. So you can see for the F activity, there are two arrows are coming. That means as we are doing a forward pass calculation, you have to take the highest value. So between the 11 and 7, the highest value is 11. For that 11, you have to add 1 and you can get the late start as 12. So the duration for the completing this project is 12. And that 12 can be put it as the late finish time. So it is 12 from that to now we are doing the backward pass calculation. From that 12, you have to deduct 1. So after deducting 1, the early finish is 11. So that 11 is going for the E activity. After deducting 2, the early finish is 9. And this 11 is going for here as well, C. So after deducting 3, it is 8. So after deducting, so for the D activity, the late finish is 9. From that 9, you have to deduct 4. It means 5. Early finish, that 5 is coming for the B activity as well. After deducting 1, it should be 4. And you can see there are two arrows are coming for the A activity. For that A activity, as we are doing a backward pass calculation, what is the value you are going to take for the late finish time? What is the time that you are going to take for the activity A late finish time? Very good. Nipuni is only respond for me, right? So between the 4 and 8, right. Thank you. So thank you very much for responding. So between 4 and 8, as we are doing the backward pass calculation, you have to get the lowest value, that is 4, right? After getting that 4, deducting again 4 means 0 early finish time, right? So we have now completed the forward and backward pass calculation. So what is the next step? To calculate the slack. So in calculating slack, you can take the difference between early finish and early start time. So the difference between early finish and early start time for the activity A is 0. For the B is again 0. For the C, how much of slack is there? 4 slack. And for the D, 0 slack again. Right, thank you. For the E activity 0 slack, for the F activity 0 slack. So after calculating slack time, we have to identify what is the next step in the project network. After identifying this slack, what is the next step you have to go? Identification of the critical path. Very good. So identification of critical path means you have to actually see what is the places where the slack time is 0. So this is one activity A and B, then activity B and D, and for the E, right? So identifying the critical path. So I have identified the critical path. So have you all do up to this point? After up to this point means identification of the critical path. Right, only Diane has. Right. So there are 3 people responded. I hope it is enough time for you. Right, thank you. So can you remember the thing that we have to do, right? So we have to start with the network diagram, right? After starting with the network diagram and after doing all this calculation, we have now identified the critical path, right? So we have done up to this point, right? So the next one is the next step actually that you have to do is produce a table that shows the duration, early start, late finish, slack and resources required for each activity. Then after you have to draw this kind of table, right? So there are some activities, so we will do that part here, right? So this is the table that you have to uh, start. So in this table, you can see there are activity. All these activities I have written down, and all the resources that we are requiring to complete each of the activities I have also listed down. So please make up. So I hope you are working with me as well. So please draw this table. So activity, you have to write down A, B, C, D, E, F, and the resources you have to write down as 6, 2. So you can see, right? So each of the resources are indicating in the middle of this box, right? So those resources I have listed out for the each of these activity. And again, the durations means this value, this cell value is the time or the duration. So I have write down that thing as well. This is for the time or duration, right? So when you are complete, when you are writing, when you are done with this table, when you are finishing off this table, let me know. Have you all finished? Only the Udar and Dayan has indicated that they have finished and done. What about others? Nipuni is also finished. Right. Diluni. Okay. So, then after you have to fill this table, right? So we have now write down what are the activities, what are the resources, and what are the durations, right? So after drawing this project network, you can easily identify what is the early start time. So the early start time is denoted uh, in this box. So for the activity A, early start time is 0. So now I'm going to fill this table by seeing this project network, right? For the slack, what is the slack for the activity A? It is 0. So uh, slack early start time and the late finish time that now we are going to fill, right? So the slack is 0 for the activity A. And late finish time for the activity A is 4. Right. So likewise, you have to done for each of these activity. For the activity B, early start is 4, slack is 0, and late finish is 5. For the C activity, early start is 4, slack is 4, and late finish is 11. And for the D activity, what is the early start? Early start is 5, slack is 0, and late finish is 9. For the E activity, early start is 9, slack is 0, and late finish is 11. For the F activity, early start is 11, slack is 0, and late finish is 12, right? So this is the way that you have to finish it off your late finish time, right? So the next one, the next step that so have you all finished this completing this table? Have you all complete this table? So actually, whether all the students who are logging to this lecture, whether you are actually doing this calculations with me, as only few number of students are responding for me. So I don't know whether all these 43 students are engaging with this calculation. So I know this is early morning, uh, but early morning means 8, no? So please get up and take a piece of paper and do this calculation. So we have now completed up to the second step, right? So so we can now go for the next step, right? So we have now completed up to this table. We have now filled it out this table. So the next one is draw an initial loading chart with each activity schedule at its early start. So you have to draw what? You have to draw the loading chart now, right? So in drawing the loading chart, you have to take the resources in this y-axis and project days for the x-axis, right? So you have to take the resources for the y-axis and project days for the x-axis, and you have to draw this initial loading chart with each activity schedule at its early start time. You have to start all of the activities with the early start time, right? So now I'm going to draw the initial loading chart with you, right? Now we are going to draw what? Initial loading chart. And you have to start with the early start time. So in this handout, it is indicating that with each activity schedule at its early start time, you have to start with the early start time. You have to start with the early start time, right? If I go the workings that I have done already, this is the first part, right? So it is not easy for me to draw this and draw this graph using the Excel. So I have taken the drawn Excel sheet, right? But I will explain step by step how you have to draw this, right? So the x-axis is resources, sorry, y-axis is resources and the x-axis is project days. So, and in this initial loading chart, you are asking to start with the early start time, right? So if I take the early start time, these are the early start time, right? I have highlighted those early start time for you, right? So early start time of activity A is what? It is 0. That means you have to start with the 0. And the resources are needed 6. Resources are needed how much? For the activity A, resources are required 6. So 2 is indicating this, right? 2 is indicating this part, and 4, 6, 8, 10, right? Likewise, the indications are there. So are you all clear with this diagram means x-axis and y-axis? So I will take the activity A and the early start time. So you have to start with the early start time, right? For the activity A, how much of resources we are needing? We need 6 resources, right? We need 6 resources. So 6 resources are indicating this is 2, this is 4, this is 6. So we are requiring 6 resources, and we are requiring the duration is 4. The duration is 4. Durations are indicating in the x-axis. So the duration is 4 is here, right? So we are starting with the early start time of 0 and goes up to the 4 duration, and the resource utilization is 6. So this is for the activity A. Have you all clear about how to draw the activity A resource loading chart? The first part, this is the part I have explained for you, right? So I have completed this part. Have you all clear that? Right. So in the initial, thank you. So in the initial loading chart, you have to start with the early start time, right? So we have now completed this activity A. So I will color it in another color, right? So I will go for the activity B. Activity B early start is 4. So activity B early start is 4, and you can see for the activity C is also early start is 4. So in the initial resource loading chart, they are asking us to start with the early start time. So there are 2 early start time with the similar duration. It is 4 for the B and C. So for the B, you can see the resource utilization. The resource required is only 2. And for the C, resource utilization is also only 2. Therefore, I will get the C activity first. So in the C activity, In the C activity, you can see the duration is 3. So we are now here in the 4. After adding third duration means for the 4, you have to add 3. That means it should be up to the 7. And the activity C is requiring 2 resources. So 2 resources mean this, right? So I will start with the early start of 4, and the C activity is requiring duration of 3. That means for the 4 you have to add 3, means you have to go up to the 7th. After going up to the 7th, you have to use 2 resources as well. So 2 resources mean this, right? So I have drawn the C part now, this part, right? So the C is now completed. Then, so the C is now completed, and we can go for now B. For the B also, the early start is 4. Early start is 4 means you have to start here. And the duration is only 1. Early start is 4 and the duration is 1 means you can finish it off by 5. Right? So this is 5 duration, and the resource required for the B activity is 2. So we are now in the 2. If we start from here, we are now in the 2. For that, we have to add 2 resources again. That means we have to go up to 4. So likewise, you have to draw the B part now. So are you all clear with drawing the B and C resource loading chart? Hello, I am asking a question. Right. So we are now completed up to what? Up to C. Up to C we have. The one is asking I B වලින් පස්සේ C ගන්න බැරි. So can you remember the according to this instruction given in the third step, draw an initial loading chart. You are now drawing the initial loading chart, right? With each activity schedule at its early start time. We have to start with the early start time, right? So according to this example, you can see the early start time is 4 for both B and C, right? Therefore, I will start first the B activity. So, because I want to consume this, if I take the resources of B and C, both resources are using 2, right? But the durations are higher in C activity. That's why I have firstly begin the C activity. It is not indicating beginning of the activities, right? In the initial loading chart, you are required to start all this activity with the early start time. As the C is having a longer duration with compared to the B, I have taken the C activity first. After drawing the C activity, I will take the B activity. That is the reason. Now, අපිට මේ initial loading chart එක අඳිනකොට ඒගොල්ලෝ කිව්වා early start time එකෙන් start කරන්න කියලා. එතකොට අපි early start time එක බැලුවම B සහ C වල දෙකේම තියෙන්නේ 4 කියලා. හරිද? එතකොට 4 කියලා තියෙනවා duration එක වැඩිපුරම තියෙන C activity එකට. ඉතින් මම ඒ C activity එක මුලින්ම ඇඳලා. ඊළඟට මම duration එක එකක් තියෙන B activity එක ඊට පස්සේ ඇඳලා. හැබැයි ඒක start කරේ early start time එක 4 වලින්මයි. So are you clear now, Diane? I am answering for your question. Right. Okay. So we have now drawn up to B and C. Right. So the D activity, the next one is D activity. So for the D activity, early start is 5. So early start is 5 means this point, right? So Now also you can see early start for the D activity is 5 here. So if I start the B activity first and C activity next, C activity is to the above, we cannot start with the 5. දැන් මං හදිස්සියවත් B activity එක මුලින්ම එහෙම පල්ලෙහාට දාලා C එක උඩට ගත්තනම් අපිට activity D කියන එක 5 වලින් start කරන්න බැරි වෙනවනේ. දැන් B එක මෙහෙට දාලා C එක මෙහෙට දැම්මොත් 5 වලින්ම start කරන්න අමාරු වෙනවා මුලින්. ඒ වගේම අර duration එක වැඩිපුර තියෙන හින්දා තමයි අපි මුලින්ම C එක ඉවර කරේ. හරිද? ඊට පස්සේ for the D activity you can see the early start is 5. So we are going to start from here. And the duration is 4. So we are now in 5. For that 5, you have to add 4 duration. We are now in 4. Sorry, we are now in 5, right? For that 5, we have to add. It should be 8, no? This need to be come here. For the 5, you have to add the duration of 4. We are now in the early start of 5 and we are utilizing the resources of 7. Harda, we are utilizing the resources of 7 mean for the 2 you have to add 7. That means we are now in 2. For that you have to add 7 mean you have to go up to 9. Right? After going up to 9, after this point we are actually we can come down, right? After this point, we can utilize the 7th resources, right? Therefore, this should be reduced up to this. And for that, after here 5, for that we are adding 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Is that right here? For the D, it should be come closer, no? මේ D එක වැරදි නේද මං ඇදලා තියෙනවා. මෙතන 5ක් තිබ්බා. 5ට 4ක් නේ එකතු වෙන්න ඕනේ. 1යි 1යි නෑ හරිනේ. 5ට 4ක් එකතු වුණාම හරි. Right. So I also get little confused here because right, for that early start time of 5 we have to add the duration of 4. So thank you Madhushi. So thank you Madhushi. For that 5, for the early start of 5 we have to add 4, right? We have to add 4 duration and we have to get the resources up to 7. And after going for 7, after coming for this point itself, we can reduce our resources. That's why I have reduced this and I am having from here to here 7. And I will go for the duration up to the 4. And this is for the D activity. So are you all clear with the D activity? Clear the D activity again? Right. So after drawing the D activity, we can go for the E activity. Right? For the E activity, early start is 9. So we can start from here 9. And the resources requiring are 3. So the resource requirement is 3. And the duration is 2. So for the 9, you have to add 2. It means it is year. I will explain the D activity again. So I will finish off E and F both and I will come to the D activity again, right? now we are in E activity, right? For the E activity, early start is 9. So the early start is 9, and I have to add the duration of 2. For the 9, you have to add 2, means it should be 11. And they are utilizing 3 resources, right? For the E activity. I think it is clear. So we are now done with the E activity as well. And I have gone for the F activity. The F activity early start is 11. So 11 means this. And for that, it is only needing the duration of 1. That means from the 11, you have to add 1, means 12. And it is consuming the resources of 6. So 6 means this much. So for the F activity, that, right? So are you all clear with E and F? So this is the initial loading chart that you have to draw. And at the initial loading chart, you have to remember that you have to start with the early start time. So that is the thing you have to remember. So one student is asking about explain the D activity again. That's why I'm explaining the D activity, right? So for the D, so we are now completed this initial loading chart. එක ස්ටුඩන්ට් කෙනෙක් D activity එක පොඩක් explain කරන්න කියපු හින්දා තමයි මම මේ explain කරන්නේ. For the D activity, you can see for the D activity early start is 5. So early start is 5. D activity means you can start here. And then ඔයාට D activity එකේ පේනවා නේද පුතේ මෙතන දැන් අපි resources දෙකක් consume කරලා තියෙන්නේ. එතකොට දෙකක් ඉවරයි මෙතන. අපිට D activity එකට resources 7ක් ඕනේ. එහෙනම් ඒක 9 දක්වාම යනවා මේ පරාසය තුල. හරිද? Within this region, this is goes up to 9. And but we are now in 5th, right? After coming for the 7. 6 and 7 means two durations are we are now completed. So after completing the 2 duration, we can again come to down because there is no any resources utilized from here. So that means we can start from 0. From 0 to 7 resource consumption is start here. And we are now completing up to the 2 duration, and the duration for the D activity is 4. That means there is 2 more duration to be completed. From 5 to 7 means 2 are completed, and 8 and 9 here. දැන් අපි මේ D activity එකේ early start එක 5. එහෙනම් අපි මෙතනින් start කරන්න ඕනේ. ඒ වුණාට මේ C activity එකේ already දෙකක් resources consume කරලා තියෙන්නේ. ඒකින්ද දෙක ඉවර හින්දා මේකට 7ක් ඕන හින්දා අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම 7ක් යනවා. ඒ කියන්නේ 9කට යනවා. මෙතන ඒගොල්ලෝ duration දෙකක් consume කරලා තියෙන්නේ. එහෙනම් මෙතෙන්ට වෙනකම් duration දෙක වෙනකම් 9ට වෙනකම් යනවා. හැබැයි ඔයාට පේනවා මෙතන 7න් පස්සේ අපිට 0 එකෙන් resources consume කරන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ කියන්නේ අපිට 7th වලට මෙතන ඉඳන් යන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ කියන්නේ තමයි මෙතනම reduce වෙලා තියෙන්නේ. ඊට පස්සේ අපේ project days එක තව දෙකක් යන්න ඕනේ. ඒකින්ද ඒ දෙකම වෙනවා. Are you all clear? 5859 about the activity D.
Yes, madam.
5859. Your name is not indicating. That's why I'm calling from your MF number. 5859 එකට තේරුණාද D activity එක ගැන? I was explained for you.
Yes, madam.
Hello.
Clear, madam.
Five 5859 නේද? මේ වත්සලා ඔයා කියන්නේ මේ loading chart එකම මේ සිංහලෙන් explain කරන්න කියලාද? 5859 clear ලු. වත්සලා ඔයා කියන්නේ මේ loading chart එකම සිංහලෙන් explain කරන්න කියලාද? D activity එකද? කෙටි. දැන් අපිට මේ resource loading chart එක අපි මේ අඳින්නේ initial stage එකේ. හරිද? initial stage එකේ අපි මේක අඳිනකොට අනිවාර්යෙන්ම අපිට බලන්න කියලා කිව්වේ early start time එක. හරිද? එතකොට අපි early start එක හැම එකේම බලන්න ඕනේ. එතකොට අපි A activity එකේ ගත්තොත් early start එක 0. ඒකේ resources කොච්චරක් use කරලා තියෙනවද 6. එහෙනම් resources 6. ඊට පස්සේ duration එකේ 4. එහෙනම් activity A එක ඇඳා. ඊට පස්සේ ඔයා B and C බලන්න early start time එක දෙකේම තියෙන්නේ 4. එහෙම තිබුණම අපි බලනවා duration එක වැඩිපුරම තියෙන්නේ මොකේද කියලා. C එකේ තියෙන්නේ. ඒකින්ද අපි ඒක මුලින්ම ඉවර කරනවා. එතකොට C එකේ 4ක් තිබ්බ duration එක 3ක් එන්න ඕනේ කියන්නේ 7ක් එන්න ඕනේ. C එක resource consumption කරන්නේ 2. එතකොට C එක ඇඳා. ඊළඟට අපි B activity එක ගියාම ඒකෙත් early start එක 4 duration එක 1. ඒ කියන්නේ 4 ඉඳන් 5ට යනවා duration එක 1. resources අපිට තිබ්බේ 2යි. හරිද? එතකොට ඔන්න B එකත් හරි. ඊට පස්සේ අපි B A B C තුනම ඉවරයි. ඊට පස්සේ අපි D එකට යනවා. D එකේ early start එක 5. මෙතනින් එහෙනම් පටන් ගන්න ඕනේ. ඒකට resources ඕනේ 7ක්. 7ක් යනවා කියන්නේ මෙතන අපි already දෙකක් consume කරලා ඉවරයි. ඒකින්ද මේක 9ට වෙනකන් යනවා. 9ට වෙනකන් ගියාට පස්සේ මෙතන 5 ඉඳගෙන අපි duration එක 4ක් යන්න ඕනේ. දැන් මෙතෙන්ට ආවම මේ 7ට ආවම කියද duration දෙකක් ඉවරයි. 7 8 9 කියන්නේ duration 4 ඉවර වෙන්නේ මෙතනින්. හැබැයි මෙතනට duration දෙකක් ඉවර වෙච්ච ගමන් අපිට 0 resources තියෙනවා. එහෙනම් අපේ resources 7යි ඕනේ. ඒකින්ද මේක අනිවාර්යෙන්ම අඩු වෙන්න ඕනේ. අඩු වෙලා 4 මේ project days 4 වෙනකන් යනවා. හරිනේ. ඔන්න D එකත් හරි. E එකේදී වෙන්නේ මොකද්ද? E එකේ early start එක 9. එහෙනම් අපි මෙතනින් start කරනවා. ඊට පස්සේ duration එක කීයද? duration එක 2යි. 9ට 2ක් එකතු කරාම 11යි. එතකොට resources කීයක් තියෙන්න ඕනද? resources 3යි. ඔන්න E එකත් ඇඳා. ඊළඟට F එකේ early start එක 11යි. 11ට duration එක එකක් එකතු වෙනවා කියන්නේ 12ක් වෙනවා. ඒකේ resource consumption එක 6. හරිද? So Vatsala, are you now clear? Vatsala, I am asking from you. Right. So we are now completed up to drawing the initial loading chart, right? So then after they are telling that we have to assume that they are having only 8 people, right? So as they are having only 8 people, we have to again load this chart, right? So the next step is rearrange activity within their Slack to create more level profile. We have to now we have to rearrange all these activity. We have to use their Slack and we have to level the profile, right? So in leveling the profile, we can do actually in the next week, right? Next week we are having Wednesday, right? So is it possible to get extra classes from you? Wednesday afternoon or likewise? So now there are 39 students. Okay, I will end the session for today and I will continue this calculation from next week onwards. So thank you very much for participating. Right. Okay. I will upload this handout. Actually, I have to do some adding parts for these handouts. That's why I did not upload. I will do it for you, right? Okay, bye.